welcome back to Shedhouse Motorcycles. I'm Rowan Mason and this is my channel for product review, how-to videos and the restoration of bikes from the 70s, 80s and 90s. In this episode, final part of week 4 is the wiring. We're finishing off the wiring part of the bike, and as you can see the wiring is actually in the bike. I've mounted the ignition coil, I've mounted the battery box, I've remounted the fuse box, I've mounted the reg rectifier, the headlights there with all the wires ready for termination when we put the instrument cluster in. But there were 3 things of interest that I think I should share with you, or want to share with you. That is the covering that I used around the engine bay to protect the wires from a very hot area. Number 2 is I wanted to show you how we converted the fuse box that I showed you in the previous week back to the original type. And the third one was tips around wiring when soldering, to avoid the solder going up the wire and wicking the wire and making it, inflexible and sometimes unusable. And also soldering around terminals that need to go into reciprocals, how to avoid the solder getting in behind the reciprocal and making it redundant. So please continue to watch, and I'll show you those 3 points of interest as we go. Time now to fix the wiring that goes to the alternator and the ignition pickup. This wiring here goes through this hole here in the crankcase cover. It goes across the engine. So because we're going across the engine, I'm going to cover the loom with this is braided heat shrink. So currently the ID of that is 20 mil. It'll shrink down to 10 mil, which will be a nice fit over the plastic PVC tubing that's already on the loom. It'll give us a nice look, and it'll just give us an added protection against any heat and water or dirt ingress. Because as I said, this is your alternator, and we've also got down here, this is your ignition pickup, and each time one of these dots, of which there are 2, we're sending a message up to the CDI unit to send a spark to the engine. So we need to keep water and dirt out of this wiring to make sure we've always got electricals working for us. To here, the wiring is the 3 phases of the alternator. This will be your neutral position switch. These will be for the CDI unit, and there's one more red and white wire which I'm pretty sure is going to be an ignition of some sort, but we'll get to that as we go. So first things first, we've got to get this grommet off so we can replace it with that grommet. We need to get this terminal block off. One of these 2 tools here will do the job for us, which allows us to go down over the terminal and push the tags back so we can get it out of the terminal, out of the block, without damaging either the terminal or the block. So we've got the grommet off and we've got all those terminals off. I just followed what I just showed you earlier. Now just put a bit of rubber grease on here. Just make sure I can see what we're doing. Rubber grease around here and here. I've cut all the terminals off here so I can get it up the wire. Those reciprocal terminals are easily sought, and I've got plenty of them, so I can easily resolder those. As opposed to these are a bit more harder to find, and I don't have a lot of those, so we'll leave those in place. So now just want to push up the wires in one go. Here's that one. Nice. Let's see how this looks. I reckon I should put some shrink around that as well. We're completely in the hole and covered. Okay, back out this side again. Let's bring it back out here. This bit just here, because we've still got one more bit of sheath to go, but we will just bring that down. down around, and that's where the wiring finishes there. So we'll cut that. So you can see it's 20mm at the moment. It's a 2-to-1 shrink rate. So let's get these wires back on. Okay. Keep the thing moving, particularly around your paintwork and plastics. And of course, as the engine gets hot and the ambient temperature around this stuff, it'll continue to shrink down. So that's given me a nice look, and we've covered the wires, and it's braided heat shrink 2-to-1. I'll put a link in the video where I got this shrink from. If you can't find it or it's too hard, just send me an email and I'll help you procure it. But then just got to put some terminals on these, or the correct ones, and when I do that, we'll come back. Fuse box. Time to get rid of this fuse box, which looks like an aftermarket, certainly not Yamaha or motorcycle, and replace it with this fuse box here, which is an aftermarket copy of the original, and that will sit on here on the battery box, and it'll go about there. Now we're going to have to put some terminals. We're going to have to put some terminals on here to marry up to this. So with that, then we can extend the wires up along here to the back and finish that off. Hook the wiring loom up to the chassis clips that are provided, and that'll be the wiring done. Okay, so what we want to do here is solder this terminal. We've got the wire in, crimped it in. We just want to give it a little bit of solder just to ensure we have a tight a connection. The crimping would probably suffice, but I'd like to just give it a dab of solder. So what we want to avoid is too much solder, which can creep down behind the tag here, which makes it redundant when we want to try and put it into the terminal block. So I just like to give it a little bit of solder at this tip point here, and that's enough just to ensure that the wire doesn't pull out. So make sure your iron is hot and get the appropriate size for the job. I like to tin it just to make sure it's tinned. Give it a flick. Make sure we've got a nice hot tinned point. And the idea is the transfer of heat from the iron. So we're just transferring some heat, and that's enough. That really is enough. That's all we want to do for this solder joint. So if you're having no luck with the tip that I just gave you around how to solder that, what you can do is two things. One, you can bring you can expose the wires at this point, and we'll put a piece of solder here. The other thing we can do is just put some grease over that surface. So tip one, leave it exposed just behind where you've crimped it, and do it in there. And the other tip is you can put grease around the reciprocal, and the grease will prevent the solder running up into it. So if I overcook the solder, hopefully you can see that it won't run beyond the grease. And then it's just a case of using some degreaser, spray it, or give it a wash with a parts washer, or CRC will be fine just to clean up the terminal. So that's one way of stopping the solder getting into the reciprocal part of the terminal, which is commonly called the tag here, which then makes it redundant when you're trying to lock it into the terminal block. Hope that's useful to you. So we want to join that piece. Now what we wanted to is just join them together. They've already got a connection, so just again, tin your solder, let the heat, and you can start to see the solder wick into the wire. And that is enough. That's it, soldered. Now if you continue to solder and add more solder to the joint, it will start to wick up the wire. You can see that, it's wicking up the wire. Now we've got a nice hard joint. Instead of having a flexible joint originally, now we've got a hard joint. Right, so how do we fix that if we're not too confident with what we're doing? Again, we just join it, just one over the other. Try and stretch it out a bit to make it flat so it's not like an ostrich neck, which I've done with this one, but it'll do for what I want to do. If you're not too confident, there's two things you can do. I'm going to use a set of calipers, but you can also use your pointy nose pliers, or again, you can use grease or oil. Should have said that before. Oil's also will stop it running. Again, we apply the solder to it. We're going to overdo the solder, just so I'll show you that it won't run past the grease. And here, the calipers are dissipating the heat, and it won't run past the calipers either, or your pointy nose pliers. The solder has a very low melting point, so all that caliper is really doing is taking the heat and stopping the solder from running, and the grease is doing exactly the same thing, but in a different way. So hopefully those tips and tricks are helpful to you when you're doing the wiring to ensure that you have a nice malleable connection. So there we are, there's the fuse box ready to install. You saw it before with this old aftermarket automotive fuse box. So we've tidied that up. We've tidied that loom up that I showed you how to do earlier. And then this tail end loom, stop tail lights are in. Put the left and right and earth, flashes, wires, connect those up. So zooming in, you saw the wiring before earlier in the video, particularly with this aftermarket fuse box. It certainly wasn't designed for a motorbike. We've put in the aftermarket fuse box that is designed for this Yamaha bike, and that'll go up in behind the shock absorber here somewhere. Then this piece will come in and we'll mount that, and we'll show you that shortly. But there we are, that's pretty much the tail end of the wiring sorted out. Okay, well that's the end of the episode for this week. Wiring is pretty much completed to the point where we can put the controls and trim and cluster back in. That'll tidy up behind the headlight there. That'll terminate a lot of those terminal blocks you see there. We're going to put the brakes on, so the front wheel will have to come out, the disc will go on, calipers, restore the calipers, get them working, hook it up to the master cylinder. We'll get the clutch operative, the front brake will be operative, and the foot brake will be operative. That's all coming up in week 5, so please hang around, continue to watch and subscribe. With subscription, you'll get notification of when week 5 is released. So in between, stay upright, stay safe, and we'll see you back in the shed next week.